The funeral had ended hours ago, yet the air still felt heavy with silence. Outside the small church in New Mexico, the wind moved through the desert trees the way it used to move through my father's hair. Wild, untamable, and gone too soon. Cameras had followed us that morning, capturing tears they could never truly understand. But when the last of the mourners drifted away, I finally felt what the world never saw: the quiet after a life like Val Kilmer's ends. My father was not just another Hollywood legend. He was a man of contradictions. Brilliant yet bruised, proud yet tender, always chasing perfection even when it destroyed him. People remember the charm, the laugh, the impossible blue eyes that once made Batman human.
You see, I'm both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Not because I have to be. No.
But few knew the fear behind them, or the loneliness that followed every standing ovation. Today, I want to tell you the story he never finished. Not the one written by tabloids or directors, but the one carved into the heart of a daughter who loved him beyond the screen. He used to say that fame is just another kind of mask, and my father wore many. I saw it even as a child. Behind the wide grin and family photos, there was a man still haunted by the ghosts of his past. When he was only 9, his parents' marriage fell apart. He never truly recovered from that fracture. In interviews, he would joke about his father's stoic silence, but behind the jokes there was ache. Once, when I was little, he confessed, "You can spend your whole life trying to hear the words your parents never said." That single sentence told me everything about him. My grandfather was distant, my grandmother loving but broken. And between them, my father learned early that affection could disappear without warning. Then came the day that changed everything: the death of his younger brother Wesley. My father was 17. Wesley suffered from epilepsy, and one afternoon while swimming, he had a seizure and drowned. The story was whispered in our family, but my father never spoke of it. Only years later, when I watched the documentary Val, did I see it in his eyes. The guilt that never left him. "He was the kind one," Dad once murmured to me. "The one who saw beauty in everything." I was supposed to protect him. I think that's when my father stopped believing in safety. Every performance afterward, from Doc Holliday's reckless laughter to Jim Morrison's descent into madness, carried that undertone of loss. Acting became his only way to talk to ghosts. He would tell me, "Pain teaches you the lines you can't forget." Maybe that's why he chased intensity in everything: work, love, faith. He didn't want to escape his pain. He wanted to understand it. But that obsession would also be his undoing. When he left for Juilliard, he was still that boy carrying too many unspoken farewells. He became the youngest student ever accepted at the school at the time, full of confidence yet painfully shy. He wrote long letters home describing nights in cold rehearsal rooms, where he'd repeat the same line until he felt it bleed truth. "If I can't make the words real," he wrote once, "then they're not worth saying." Even then, he was different. Other students wanted fame, Val wanted truth. At 12, he had walked off a hamburger commercial because he couldn't believe in the burger. At 22, he was already fighting directors over honesty. That same fire that made him brilliant also made him impossible. And yet, that impossible spirit built legends. When I was a child, I asked him why he kept every old script he'd ever worked on. He smiled and said, "Because every character I played was a piece of me that got lost somewhere." I didn't understand then, but now I do. Each role, Morrison, Holiday, Batman, Iceman, was an attempt to rebuild the parts life had shattered. There's a moment in Val where he looks straight into the camera and says, "I've lived a magical life, and I've ruined it more than once." That was him. Self-aware, unapologetic, but quietly heartbroken. He knew the damage he carried, but he never learned how to set it down. When my brother Jack and I were young, our father wasn't the myth people imagined. He was gentle, sometimes distracted, sometimes lost. He'd spend hours in his art studio, surrounded by half-finished paintings and old photographs. One night, I found him sketching our late uncle from an old family picture. I asked why. He said softly, "Because I still owe him a goodbye." That line has stayed with me. Maybe that's what this video really is. The goodbye he never gave, the truth he never told. My father used to say that acting was the only time he could tell the truth, but that truth often came with a cost. To his peace, his relationships, and sometimes to his sanity. When I was old enough to ask about his early years in Hollywood, he laughed softly and said, "They don't teach you how to survive success at Juilliard." He meant it. In his 20s, he was already known for being uncompromising. Directors admired his talent but feared his intensity. He once told me a story from a set where he refused to shoot a scene because he didn't feel the moment was honest. They called him difficult, but for him, art wasn't about pretending. It was about bleeding for something real. He carried that same conviction into The Doors. To prepare for playing Jim Morrison, he spent months living like him, reading his poetry, wearing his clothes, even mimicking his voice until it haunted our house. My grandmother once said she couldn't tell where Val ended and Morrison began. When the film finally premiered, he didn't go to the after party. "I already lived it," he said. But that same devotion that made his performances unforgettable also fractured his life. He struggled to turn the intensity off. He became trapped between who he was and who he played. It was during this time he met my mother, actress Joanne Whalley, on the set of Willow. She said he was the most alive man she'd ever met. He said she was the first person who ever looked past his masks. Their chemistry was undeniable, electric both on and off camera. I grew up hearing stories about those early days. The laughter, the late-night drives, the secret poems he wrote her. But by the time I was born, the love that had burned so brightly was already dimming. Fame, ego, and the weight of expectation had entered their marriage like uninvited guests. My father once admitted that he loved too fiercely and apologized too late. When I asked why they divorced, he only said, "I was still trying to become someone worth loving." Their split in 1996 was painful. My mother accused him of infidelity. He retreated into silence. In his memoir, I'm Your Huckleberry, he called it the darkest chapter of his life, a time when he felt both punished and lost. He'd loved my mother deeply, but didn't know how to love gently. Afterward, he tried to fill the emptiness with work. He took roles that challenged him: Heat, Batman Forever, The Same, each one another mask to hide the ache. He told me once that Batman's suit felt like a prison. "You can't breathe, you can't hear, you can barely see," he said, but it's the most accurate metaphor for fame. Offset, rumors followed him. Stories of temper, perfectionism, impossible demands. Some were true. He wasn't easy to work with, but beneath the tension was always something else. Fear. Fear of failure, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not being enough. He once wrote in a letter to a friend, "People think I want control. What I really want is clarity." The world never gave him that clarity. Instead, it gave him headlines like, "Val Kilmer makes enemies in Hollywood." The same passion that had made him a legend now made him a liability. Yet, when he spoke about those years later, there was no bitterness. In the Val documentary, he said, "I've behaved poorly, bravely, bizarrely, but always with my heart." That was the truest version of him. Love came and went. He dated icons, Cher, Cindy Crawford, Daryl Hannah. Yet the pattern was always the same: intensity, disconnection, regret. Of all the names in his memoir, only one made him pause when he read aloud for the audiobook: Daryl. His voice trembled as he said, "Lord knows I've suffered heartache, but Daryl was the most painful of all." When I asked him about it once, he smiled faintly. Some loves don't fade. They just stop being allowed. He turned that pain inward, into art. His notebooks filled with sketches, poems, prayers. He would paint for hours, losing track of time. On some nights, he'd play old recordings of Jim Morrison and whisper along, not as an actor, but as a man talking to the ghost of who he used to be. Even as his career soared, something inside him was collapsing. He was restless, trapped between the spotlight and solitude. "Hollywood rewards the loudest souls," he said once, "but I was never loud enough for them. I think that's why he built our family home so far from Los Angeles, deep in the canyons, surrounded by desert light and silence. He wanted distance from the noise, from himself. There, he started raising me and my brother, trying to become the man he had lost somewhere in fame's reflection. He became a father the only way he knew how, through creation. He'd film us on his old camcorder, narrating every moment like a movie. This, he would whisper, zooming in on our faces, "This is the only thing that's real." But even then, the past never stopped knocking. He'd grow quiet sometimes at dinner, eyes distant. I once caught him looking at an old photo of the Doors cast and heard him say softly, "I wish I'd been kinder, to them and to myself." That's who my father was, a man who felt everything too deeply and carried it too long. The world saw him as larger than life. I saw him as a man trying to find where life ended and performance began.
I'm gonna love you till the heavens stop the rain.
There are certain sounds you never forget. The hum of hospital machines, the hush of waiting rooms, the trembling rhythm of a breath that might stop. For us, those sounds became the soundtrack of my father's later years. When the doctors told him in 2015 that the lump in his throat was cancer, he just nodded. No anger, no fear, just that quiet Kilmer stare, the same one he gave villains in Heat and Tombstone. But I saw the flicker in his eyes. He knew this was the role he couldn't rehearse his way out of. He told us it was nothing, a healing in progress. He didn't want anyone to worry, didn't want pity. He was raised a Christian Scientist. He believed faith could heal the body, but as the pain grew and his breathing worsened, it was my brother Jack and I who begged him to get real treatment. "Dad," I said through tears, "we've seen you fight for every character. Now fight for yourself." That night, he finally agreed to the surgery. It saved his life, but it cost him his voice. When I first heard him speak afterward, it wasn't a voice. It was a whisper made of air and effort. I froze, unable to hide my tears. He squeezed my hand and scribbled on a notepad, "Don't cry. I'm still here." He was right. He was still here, but quieter, smaller, different. The man who once filled rooms with booming laughter now communicated through short bursts, pointing to notebooks, drawing or mouthing the words until we learned to read his lips. For a man whose identity had always been tied to performance, silence became both punishment and salvation. During those months of recovery, I saw a different kind of strength in him. Not the swagger of Doc Holliday or the icy confidence of Iceman, but something gentler. He spent hours painting in sunlight, sketching angels and deserts, symbols of endurance. He would hum when he couldn't sing, tapping the table to the rhythm of a song only he could hear. One day I asked, "Does it hurt to talk?" He shook his head, smiled, and wrote, "It hurts more not to talk." That's when the artist in him reinvented himself again. He began filming everything. Old reels, home videos, memories he tucked away for decades. "If I can't speak," he told us, "I'll show." That collection became the foundation of the 2021 documentary Val. Watching it later, I realized it wasn't a film about fame or illness. It was a film about forgiveness. He confronted the ghosts of his youth, the brother he lost, the father who never said sorry, the roles that consumed him. He watched his younger self on screen with the tenderness of someone finally at peace. In one haunting scene, his AI-generated voice reads words he had typed but couldn't speak. "I've lived a magical life, and I've learned it's not how loud you are, but how deeply you feel." That line still makes me cry. When Top Gun Maverick called, he hesitated. He didn't want people to see him broken. But Tom Cruise insisted. "This movie doesn't work without Iceman," he said. I remember the day my father filmed that scene. The one where Maverick visits Iceman in silence. On set, no one breathed. The crew cried. The dialogue was short, the moment eternal. For once, fiction matched life. A man stripped of voice but overflowing with meaning. After the film's release, letters poured in. Fans thanked him for reminding them what real courage looked like. He read every one, tracing the words with his finger, whispering, "See? I'm still hurt." But illness doesn't care about legacy. Over the next few years, pneumonia came and went, leaving him weaker each time. He refused to stay in hospitals. "I've lived under lights my whole life," he wrote. "I want to die in sunlight." So we brought him home to Brentwood, to the house he built with his own hands. He loved that place. The ivy on the walls, the smell of paint and coffee, the way afternoon light spilled through the windows like a movie set. He said the house was his final stage, and every morning he sat in his favorite chair surrounded by canvases, sipping tea through a straw. Sometimes he'd point to an unfinished painting and write, "Too many details, just like life." Other days he'd play jazz records, tapping his foot softly. He still smiled even when breathing hurt. Once he scrawled on a napkin, "My body's fading, but my joy's still loud." He never lost that sense of humor. When I teased him about his tracheotomy tube, he scribbled, "Batman's new gadget." I laughed so hard I cried. Even in pain, he wanted to make us laugh, as if humor could keep the darkness away. The truth is, he was preparing us for goodbye long before we realized it. He organized old photos, labeled boxes, even left notes on the back of paintings. "Keep this one. You'll need its light someday." Every act of letting go was wrapped in love. In his final months, he often sat by the garden window at dawn, sunlight touching his face, sketchbook in hand. When I asked what he was drawing, he showed me a page filled with wings. "Angels?" I whispered. He smiled and wrote, "No. Freedom." That was my father, fragile, fearless, and free, even as his body betrayed him. It was a warm April morning when I realized my father was slipping away. The California sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting golden lines across his face. He had fallen asleep in his favorite chair, the same one he'd written scripts in, the same one he used to sit in while teaching Jack and me about old movies. The teacup beside him was still warm, his sketchbook was open, another page of wings. I called out softly, "Dad!" He didn't move. There was no pain on his face, no struggle, just peace. It was as if he drifted into another dream, the one he'd been preparing for all along. When the paramedics arrived, the house felt unreal. Too still, too bright, as though even the walls were holding their breath. My brother and I sat together on the floor beside him, unable to speak. Outside, birds sang, the same sound he used to record for his films. I remember thinking, even the world doesn't know he's gone yet. The press reported that Val Kilmer died of complications from pneumonia at age 65. But that's not what I saw. What I saw was a man who spent his final years reclaiming his life from pain. A man who had learned to live without his voice, but not without love. He didn't die from illness. He simply finished his story. We held a small funeral in Brentwood, just family and a few of his closest friends. No paparazzi, no speeches, no red carpets, just sunlight, jazz, and silence. Jack played one of Dad's favorite songs, "Fly Me to the Moon," on guitar, and we laid fresh white roses beside his chair. In that moment, the man who once played gods and legends returned to being what he always was. A father who tried, a dreamer who loved deeply, a soul who never stopped creating. When I spoke at his funeral, I didn't talk about Top Gun or Batman or The Doors. I talked about the smaller things. The way he made pancakes shaped like hearts when I was little. The way he stayed up to help me memorize lines for school plays. The way he'd say, "Don't act, just feel." Because that was his real teaching. Not about performance, but about presence. A week later, as I began sorting through his art studio, I found something that stopped me cold. Inside an old sketchbook was a letter addressed to Jack and me. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the handwriting uneven from his illness. It read, "My dear ones, if you're reading this, I've gone where there are no cameras, no scripts, and no second takes. Don't let sadness steal the laughter we built. I have lived my share of miracles. I met love. I met loss. I met you. And that's enough for one lifetime. Remember, I was never the roles they wrote for me. I was the father who watched you grow, the man who learned too late how to say I love you, and the artist who finally found peace in silence. Don't mourn the voice I lost. Celebrate the words I left behind. Love always, Dad. I read it again and again, my tears blurring the ink until the words looked like wings. Maybe that's what he meant all along. When the news of his passing reached the world, tributes flooded in. Tom Cruise called him the soul of courage. Cher wrote that he was too alive to ever be gone.
I just want to say that was pretty emotional. I've known Val for decades, and for him to come back and play that character, he's such a powerful actor that he instantly became that character again.
Directors, actors, and fans shared clips. From Tombstone's smirk to Heat's cold precision, moments that reminded everyone how he made even silence speak. But what moved me most were the letters from ordinary people, teachers, soldiers, parents, who said his resilience helped them face their own battles. They saw beyond the fame and into the fragility, the fight, the faith. That was his real legacy. Not the movies, but the mirror he held up to anyone who ever felt broken and kept going anyway. Weeks later, I visited his favorite spot by the garden, where the desert meets the sky. I sat there as he once did in the quiet he loved and whispered, "You did it, Dad. You turned pain into poetry." The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying that warmth that always followed him. Part light, part laughter, part mystery. Now, when I watch Val, it feels less like a documentary and more like a love letter he left for the world. The boy who lost his brother, the man who lost his voice, he still found a way to be heard. Every frame feels like his heartbeat preserved in film. He once said, "Art isn't about being perfect. It's about leaving proof that you were here." And that's exactly what he did. Proof that beauty can survive even when the voice cannot. Sometimes at night, I play the audio his AI voice made for Top Gun: Maverick. Hearing him say, "It's good to see you, old friend," breaks me every time, because it feels like he's still speaking to all of us. My father lived like a storm, passionate, flawed, unstoppable, and left behind a sky full of light. And maybe that's how legends really die. Not in darkness, but in brightness too strong to fade. Val Kilmer's life was a collision of art and suffering, of fame and fragility. He lost his voice, but found his truth. He fell from grace and climbed back in silence. He was difficult, brilliant, human. His daughter's words, my words, aren't a eulogy. They're a reminder that behind every star is a soul still learning how to heal. If you've ever loved someone complicated, if you've ever carried regret or faith or unfinished goodbyes, then in some small way you understand Val Kilmer. Because his story isn't just about Hollywood, it's about all of us, searching for meaning, forgiveness, and light before the credits roll. So, to those still listening, tell someone you love them before the scene fades. Laugh louder, forgive faster, and never wait for the final act to live truthfully. Thank you for watching, and for remembering the man behind the legend. I'm Mercedes Kilmer, and this was my father's story.